This research project came about because of some photos I found of freighter G-AGVC in front of some Avro Canada hangars, and I was curious to know the context behind the photos. Throughout the course of my research, there were a number of additional photos that I was able to acquire, but they also lacked supporting metadata. However, I'm fairly confident of my descriptions, dates, and locations that follow. That said, if anyone does spot an error, please let me know after my presentation, and I'll be happy for their correction. So the Bristol Type 170 freighter was designed in response to British Air Ministry Specification 2244, which called for a transport aircraft, mixed passenger, freight passenger, or all freight high payload short distance. This was revised in C.9/45, which called for military transport aircraft capable of carrying a 3-ton load into jungle areas. The design prioritized interior cargo space, with the cockpit being high set, resulting in the freighter's distinctive boxy appearance and rounded nose. The twin-engined, high-wing aspect of design was a development from the 1930s Bristol Bombay bomber transport. When flying in support of New Zealand troops in Vietnam, at least one American crew is noted as commenting on the freighter's outdated appearance by asking the Kiwi flight crew if that was their aircraft or the box it came in. The ferry became best known as an air ferry, ferrying passengers and their cars across the English Channel to France. The prototype Bristol 170 G-AGVC first flew on December 2nd, 1945, and became the first British post-war civil aircraft to gain an unrestricted certificate of airworthiness in 1946. The second prototype, Bristol 170 Mark II Wayfarer G-AGVB, was designed to carry 44 passengers and first flew on April 30th, 1946. This aircraft carried out proving flights to the Channel Islands, carrying over 10,000 passengers in under 6 months. The freighter and its variants were powered by two Bristol Hercules 14-cylinder, 2-row radial aircraft engines. During the war, the Hercules engine powered the Bristol Beaufighter, Short Sunderland, Handy Page Halifax, and Handy Page Halifax, to name a few. Post-war, it powered the Handley Page Hastings. In the photo on the left, you can clearly see the cooling fan just after the propeller. And in the photo on the right is of the Bristol Hercules engine on display at the National Air Force Museum of Trenton. A clear plexiglass cover allows visitors to see the complex planetary gear system that drives the Hercules 14-cylinder sleeve valves. The engine on display came from a Hawk Air freighter from British Columbia. A total of 214 freighters were built in all variants, including the Mark I, Mark 21, and Mark 31 freighter, the Mark 32 super freighter, and the Mark II Wayfarer. The super freighter, pictured here in this Eagle magazine cutaway, features a longer nose to increase car and passenger carrying capacity, and has an increased tail fin. The freighter would be used by a number of civil operators, including Silver City Airways of the UK, Sabena of Belgium, Safe Air of New Zealand, and a dozen or so Canadian operators. In military service, the freighter was operated by Argentina, Australia, Burma, Canada, Iraq, New Zealand, Pakistan, and the UK. More on the Canadian civil operators and the RCAF usage later to come in the presentation. Performance-wise, the freighter could carry a 5,000-pound load over 1,700 miles at 164 miles per hour, or a 12,000-pound load over 820 miles. In August 1946, Bristol Freighter Mark I G-AGVC, the third aircraft built and the first freighter with fully operational hydraulic-operated nose doors, left the UK to embark on a 5-month demonstration tour of the Americas. The freighter and the tour would capture the attention of the media, making headlines wherever it went. On the left is an article dated August 7th, 1946, from the Winnipeg Tribune, advising readers about G-AGVC's visit to Winnipeg in October. And on the right is a December 1945 advert from Canadian Aviation magazine promoting the 1946 fall tour. For the tour, the crew consisted of Colin Richardson, co-pilot and navigator from the Sperry Gyroscope Company, Ralph Paulette, radio engineer from Marconi, Jim Hannington, flight engineer from Bristol, and Frank Burrows, airframe engineer, also from Bristol. GAGVC was captained by Arthur George Tim Sims of Montreal, vice president of British Aeroplane Engines Limited, Montreal. Sims was born in London and moved to Canada in 1927, where he worked for Canadian Wright Limited and its associated company, British Aeroplane Engines Limited of Montreal, in engine assembly, overhaul, and testing. The expertise that he acquired here on engines would serve him well throughout his career. Sims flew as a bush pilot across eastern Canada in the 1930s, eventually becoming vice president of Bristol Aeroplane Engines Limited, while at the same time flying as test pilot for Canadian Vickers. In 1940, he was seconded to the Department of Munitions and Supply in Ottawa as Director of Engine and Propeller Overhaul. He was also appointed to the National Research Council Aero Engine Committee. From 1942 to 1945, Sims ferried aircraft across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans for Area Ferry Command. After the freighter demonstration tour of the Americas in 1946, he went to work for Canadair, first as a sales representative, leading the North Star sales team to the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Italy, and retiring as Director of Military Aircraft Sales in 1964. Sims was inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame in 1974. Bristol Freighter G-AGVC left Filton, UK on August 2, 1946, on the first leg of its transatlantic crossing to Goose Bay, Labrador. The aircraft made stops in Prestwick, Scotland, and Reykjavik, Iceland, before arriving in Goose Bay. The flight itinerary called for a refueling stop in Greenland. However, the aircraft had ample fuel, and the crew decided to press on to Labrador. The crossing took 20 hours of flying time. For the crossing, the freighter had 3 special long-range fuel tanks fitted in its fuselage, which carried an additional 900 gallons of fuel. Upon arrival, Burrows commented, "As a crew, we felt proud to have been instrumental in once again forcing home the point that British workmanship and goods are the tops. The aircraft behaved as we knew it would." After refueling and resting, the crew departed early for Montreal, Quebec, arriving at Dorval on August 5, 1946, to a crowd of journalists and other interested spectators. To quote from the official Bristol tour report, "Then, as the roar of the engines died away, they saw the huge nose doors swing wide. Movie cameramen among them were taken by surprise. Almost before they had a chance to start shooting, the entire width of the freighter's hold yawned open. Then came the revelation that the freighter had brought from England the first cargo ever to be flown across the North Atlantic by a freight aircraft. A selection of autumn suits for women, the latest work in feminine sartorial elegance from one of London's leading fashion houses. The packages were checked through customs, loaded into a waiting van which backed right up to the sill of the open hold, and whisked away to the store of T. Eaton & Co. of Montreal, to be placed on show within an hour of the freighter's arrival." Similar descriptions of the arrival are found in the Montreal Gazette, which added, "The aircraft is the first of a line of tramp ships of the air," a name that would stick with GAGVC for the duration of the tour. Dozens of newspapers in the Montreal area featured the freighter's arrival, with one headline saying, "Tramp Ship of the Air flies like a charm." And in the photo, Frank Burrows in white is seen unloading the freighter's cargo. On August 7th, GAGVC departed Montreal and headed to the Avro Canada plant at Malton, Ontario. Here, the long-range fuel tanks were removed, minor modifications were made, and the aircraft painted in its demonstration tour livery. Pictured here is GAGVC in its natural metal finish before painting. And here are 2 photos of GAGVC in its new paint scheme. The colors are described as light blue surmounting dark blue with a narrow gold band separating the two. The engine nacelles were painted golden brown to camouflage discolorization from the engine exhausts. On the nose of the aircraft, the list of locations visited is still short compared to what would be to come. And these are some of the images I referred to, which originally sparked my interest in this aircraft and why it was in Malton. Freighter G-AGVC's first public debut in the new paint scheme was at the International Air Show held a short distance away at Downsview Airport on August 30th. After landing, the nose opened and a 1947 Studebaker Champion, complete with driver and two charming mannequins wearing the latest fashions from Simpson's department store, was driven down the ramp. This performance was repeated on the second and third days of the show. Over 3 days, over 80,000 people saw the freighter in action. To quote the Bristol tour report, "No film star could have been more severely mobbed than GAGVC at Toronto. The crew found necessary, in fact, to rope the machine off to represent enthusiastic crowds tearing off bits and pieces to take home as souvenirs." A combined Royal Canadian Navy, Royal Canadian Air Force, and Canadian Army operation was scheduled as part of the International Air Show. To quote from the August 31st Globe and Mail, "The plan for operations calls for fighter bombers to strafe the airport, typifying a German airfield, which is strongly defended, and then provide protecting cover for the 3 Dakota trooper carriers and 2 gliders, which will bring in the paratroopers and supplies." However, the gliders had broken away from their tow ropes and were not available to take part in the display. An officer who had witnessed the freighter's demonstration earlier suggested it stand in for the gliders, and Sims and crew were asked if they would assist. GAGVC took off carrying 2 jeeps and a 6-pound gun and crew. After landing and opening the nose doors, it took 2.5 minutes for the airborne troops to unload their equipment and bring it into action. To quote Burroughs, "The Army, ready for the word go, literally tore out amid a cascade of smoke bombs and thunder flashes." This impressive display resulted in an invitation by the Army to bring the freighter to Carberry and Camp Shiloh, Manitoba, so they could carry out a series of special demonstrations and loading tests with the aircraft. At the time, Camp Shiloh was home to the Canadian Parachute Training Center, and Carberry was a former BCATP base that the RCAF was using as a storage depot. The Bristol tour report makes no mention of the Camp Shiloh stop, but it does appear on the side of the freighter and is mentioned in the press as being a destination for GAGVC. At Carberry, the Army loaded all manner of vehicles, guns, and equipment into GAGVC to examine load-carrying capabilities of the freighter. Of all the equipment tested, only a 17-pound anti-tank gun would not fit in due to the wide wheelbase, although the crew found a way to overcome this problem with wooden planks. The freighter was tested side by side at Dakota, with Richardson noting 2 jeeps could be loaded and lashed down in the freighter in less time than it takes to load and lash 1 jeep in the Dakota. In this photo, a Bofors anti-tank gun is loaded into GAGVC. Note the Anson 5s in the background. One final anecdote from GAGVC's visit to Carberry/Camp Shiloh. According to Burroughs, the crew were persuaded, in italics, to jump from a 260 feet high parachute tower, much to the amusement of spectators. RCF Station Rockcliffe in Ottawa was freighter GAGVC's next stop to demonstrate the aircraft's unique load-carrying capabilities to Army and Air Force officers and Canadian government officials, including C.D. Howe, Minister of Reconstruction, and Lieutenant General Fuchs, Chief of General Staff. Interesting to note the lineup of Canadian Army vehicles and guns in the background as well as a Waco P2GA powered glider and a Dakota. So this is just a close-up of the last image. Dates for this visit are not mentioned in the Bristol tour report. However, the September 13th Ottawa Journal article, Tramp Ship of Air Carries Gun and Truck in Rockcliffe Show, indicates a flight that morning at Rockcliffe, as well as another planned to take place the following morning, September 14th. The article also mentions the airborne troops were under the command of Major G.A. Flint from Camp Shiloh, as well as mentioning a number of vehicles and guns used in the demonstration. In the picture, airborne troops load a Dodge 3/4-ton airborne portable truck and towed artillery piece. After a flight in the freighter, Fuchs is quoted as saying that it was just the type of plane that the Canadian Army was looking for, though in reviewing the RCAF procurement files for the freighter, I found no reference to this demonstration, and I have yet to find any official Army or RCAF documentation about the tour. In this photo, a Chevrolet C63-ton truck is loaded into the freighter as officials look on. The Ottawa Journal article commented, "It proved to be a tight fit." Note the flying fortress in the background by the freighter's elevator. This image and the next 4 images required some detective work to ascertain their location. Here, airborne troops load a 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun. And in these final 2 images, these final two Rockcliffe images, we have close-ups of what may be a Mark II track Jeep on the left and a universal carrier, also known as a Bren gun carrier, on the right, though I'm not a tracked vehicle expert, so I could be mistaken about the track Jeep. CAHS returned to Montreal for the official tour, where it was decided to paint 4 Union Jacks on the freighter, one on each side of the nose and tail. This was done in response to the number of people assuming throughout the tour that the freighter must have been American in origin, because, to quote the Bristol tour report, the freighter was new and stylishly painted. The aircraft's next stop was New York, where this color image was taken. I included it to show the newly added Union Jack and to give an idea of the turquoise blue color of the freighter. GAGVC arrived in New York on September 19. After visiting New York, Washington, and Boston, freighter GAGVC returned to Canada to stops in at Moncton, Halifax, Charlottetown, Sept-Îles, Montjoly, and Baie-Comeau. To once again turn to the Bristol tour report, at Montjoly, a special demonstration was given for Babe Willett, district manager of Canadian Pacific Airlines. Mr. Willett was flown to a homemade landing strip at Baie-Comeau, where the freighter gave an excellent demonstration of landing on a short runway. The airfield here had been cut out of the bush by a lumber operator and measured 3,000 feet in length. After another visit to the United States, GAGVC was in Winnipeg, Manitoba, on either October 5th or 6th. In this photo, Sims and crew pose with M. Sunderland, Director of Maintenance and Engineering, and Paul Devaud, Operations Assistant to the General Manager, both of TransCanada Airlines, as well as A.K. Muir, General Manager, Giant Yellowknife Gold Mines Limited. This photo also illustrates the increasing size of the tour stops on the freighter's nose. Continuing westward, GAGVC landed in Edmonton, Alberta, where it was loaded with 7,500 pounds of freight bound for Yellowknife. According to the Edmonton Bulletin, the biggest plane load of freight for the Northwest Territories. The cargo included turkeys, cases of steak and onions, baby food, fresh eggs, and a variety of fresh and canned fruits and vegetables for the Hudson Bay Company. Equipment for the giant Yellowknife gold mines was also on board. The freighter left Edmonton on October 11th. The Bristol tour report describes Yellowknife as a gold mining outpost on the bleak shores of Great Slave Lake. This picture illustrates the ruggedness of the area at the time. Returning to the Bristol tour report for what happened next. In hospital at Yellowknife lay 14-year-old Donald Iluk, Inuit boy from Canada's Arctic, sole survivor of a fishing vessel which had been blown up in Cambridge Bay, 600 miles to the north, some weeks previously. The victims claimed by the explosion included his father, brother, and sister. Iluk was brought to Yellowknife and for 5 weeks and laid there, suffering from burns over almost his entire body, unable to move. The arrival of the freighter proved to be an opportunity to take him away swiftly and comfortably to Edmonton, where there were better facilities for his treatment there. A snowstorm was raging as GAGVC took off on her errand of mercy. In a vain effort to clear the snow, she climbed at 10,000 feet. There was no sign of a break. But the crew dared not take the plane higher. There was no oxygen, and climbing to greater altitude without it may have proved fatal for the sick Inuit. The freighter came down to 4,000 feet and stayed there. For 4 nerve-wracking hours, she flew blind, through snow, driving so thickly that the crew were able to catch only the very occasional glimpses of the ground. The photo shows Iluk smiling for the photographer that greeted GAGVC on arrival in Edmonton. George Pigeon of Yellowknife Airways is left, and airframe engineer Frank Burrows is on the right. Its mercy mission behind it, GAGVC and crew departed Edmonton for Vancouver, British Columbia, on the Pacific coast. Crossing the Rockies would turn out to be another harrowing adventure due to icing. The Bristol Tour report describes the flight. The freighter had to climb to over 18,000 feet to avoid severe icing. Both throttle de-icer and propeller de-icer were brought into use, and to quote Hannington, ice was slaying in all directions from the propeller. Numerous dents were caused to the fuselage directly in line with the propeller blades, particularly on the port side. The cabin window on the starboard side was cracked but did not break. The journey, however, was completed, and we subsequently arrived in Vancouver. In Vancouver, a local football team, the Vancouver Marilomas, were due to play the Victoria Mustangs in a Thanksgiving Day game on October 14th. However, the Vancouver team was unable to secure a boat reservation. Upon hearing this, Sims offered to fly all 28 players, their coach, captain, and 1 or 2 club officials to Victoria aboard GAGVC, an offer that was quickly accepted by the team. According to the Bristol Tour report, the visiting side, far from being disturbed by air travel, played exhibition football and were extremely unfortunate to lose by 13-12. An article in the October 24th Ottawa Journal carried the headline, "Glimpse of the Future," when it was referring to the flight. GAGVC also underwent its 100-hour inspection while in Vancouver, with a complete wheel change being the only major bit of maintenance needed to be done. Sims wrote, "On almost every landing, I have had to use the brakes excessively due to the demonstration reasons. And I must say that I have been surprised how well they have stood up to this mistreatment." After leaving Vancouver, GAGVC headed south once more to tour the United States, West Indies, and Central and South Americas, though this is beyond the scope of this presentation. Film buffs may recognize the Bristol-born actor Cary Grant as he alights from GAGVC at Los Angeles. Grant had visited Bristol Airplane Company earlier in the year and seen other freighters being built. He also had a friend of his as part of the tour crew. Freighter GAGVC returned to Malton at the end of the 5-month demonstration tour. During that time, the aircraft visited 75 towns, 25 countries, performed 193 takeoffs and landings, used 32,000 gallons of fuel, and covered 41,000 miles. You can see the map from the official tour report on the left, and the photo on the right was taken after the tour in March 1947. GAGVC has been stripped back to a natural metal finish, and the tour stops, Union Jack, and freighter name has been painted back on. While no location was given for this photo, I do suspect that it was taken when the aircraft returned to the UK. However, before returning to the UK, in February 1947, CAHS was chartered by Canadian Pacific Airlines to haul heavy mining equipment into a new coal field in Labrador, as well as other heavy loads around Sept-Îles, Mont-Joli, and the Baie-Comeau regions. While operating off of frozen Knob Lake, Labrador, the freighter damaged an undercarriage leg when landing during a blizzard, and a new leg was hastily flown across the Atlantic to Montreal on a TCA aircraft. When the replacement leg arrived at Knob Lake, the mechanics worked all night, and the next day, CAHVC was flown off the ice. These two photos show a CPA Anson being loaded in CAHVC. Aircraft recovery was highlighted by Bristol in promotional material as one of the tasks that the freighters were well suited for. If anyone watching has information on the circumstances surrounding these photos, please do let me know. Upon its return to the UK, CAHVC went to work for City Silver Airways, inaugurating Silver City Airways' Lymph to Le Touquet car ferry service on July 14th, 1948. It also took part in the Berlin airlift, and in 1949 was modified as a military freighter with 1,800 horsepower Hercules 238 engines, longer propellers, and a reinforced freight floor meeting RAF Transport Command requirements. The aircraft is seen here at Ringway Airport, Manchester in 1955. By June 1962, CAHVC was operating with Manx Airlines, where it would meet its end. On landing at the Isle of Man Airport on June 30th, 1962, the undercarriage of freighter CAHVC collapsed, resulting in the aircraft being written off. The photo on the left was taken not long after the accident, and on the right shows recovery attempts. The livery is very similar to the last scheme the aircraft wore before being sold by Silver City Airways. Note the British Civil Air Ensign on the tail of the aircraft. The Bristol Freighter would continue to operate in Canada and by Canadians up until 2004, when the last freighter flight took place when Hawk Air Aviation flew CGYQS ex-Royal New Zealand Air Force aircraft NZ5907 to Reynolds, Alberta Museum. The RCAF operated 6 freighters from 1952 to 1967, the first 3, freighter Mark 31Cs, being taken on strength between April 1952 and March 1953. 2 Mark 31Ms followed in March 1955, and a sole Mark 31 was accepted in April 1956. Freighter 9696 was first on strength with number 4 transport OTU before being briefly operated by 412 Squadron Rockcliffe. It was transferred to number 137 transport flight at Lachine, Quebec, where the other 2 early freighters would join it. In 1953, the aircraft were sent to Langar, UK to support the Canadian Air Divisions based in France and West Germany. Just how much of an impact did the 1946 demonstration tour have on the 1952 purchase of the aircraft is hard to say. In reviewing the RCF's procurement files for the freighter, as well as the Rockcliffe station logs, I could find no mention of CAHVC's demonstration tour, nor could I find any official thoughts on its visits to Rockcliffe and Shiloh. It's interesting to note that, for the most part, by the 1950s, the RCF did not want the freighter, as it much preferred the Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar. The freighter's single-engine performance and cargo carrying capacity was lacking by comparison. What made the freighter attractive to the RCF, however, was spares and support for a British-built aircraft would be easily acquired for those European-based machines. In addition, tests at Uplands in 1952 had shown its ability to carry a Sabre minus engine. This meant Sabres could be easily transported by freighter between RCF bases in France and West Germany and Air Materiel Base at Langar, UK. Here An RCF Sabre fuselage is being loaded into Freighter 9698, belonging to 137 transport flight sometime between 1955 and 1964. This freighter would later be sold to Lam Air before suffering an accident at Trout Lake, Manitoba. 2 RCF freighters were lost in accidents, with the remaining 4 being sold to civil operators in Canada. In Canada, the freighter was operated by Associated Airways, Canadian Pacific Airlines, Central Northern Airways, Hawk Air, Lam Air, Maritime Central Airways, Northern Canada Air, Norcan Air, Pacific Western Airlines, Transair, TransCanada Airlines, and Ward Air. These aircraft were seen across Canada, but mainly in the north, supporting the DEW line. On the left is a TCA freighter, and on the right, Ward Air freighter CFWAD in Yellowknife in July 1972. This aircraft was destroyed in a crash at Hay River, Northwest Territories in 1978. I actually recall a conversation with the late Patty Gardner where he told me about witnessing this crash. In addition to CGYQS in Alberta, the Royal Aviation Museum of Western Canada in Winnipeg holds former Norcan Air freighter CFWAE. This aircraft is an ex-RCF machine that was also used by Ward Air. Perhaps the most famous preserved freighter in Canada is former Ward Air aircraft CFTFX, found in Yellowknife. This freighter has the distinction of being the first wheeled aircraft to land at the North Pole. Thank you all for joining the presentation. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Here's my list of credits and thanks, especially Louise Clark at the Aerospace Bristol archive in the UK was fantastic, and everyone in the CAHS who helped me by providing photos and suggestions for this presentation.